Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mo. Hi, Temidayo. Hi, Adeleke. So we're going to have a 30-minute conversation about law, and these guys are my senior learned colleagues, so you're going to see me bowing a lot because I want to learn from them. So I guess my very first question to you guys would be, what are the most common legal mistakes founders make when starting their startup?
Wow. Okay. I think it's very context specific, but I'll talk about what we see most of the time. And I'm also talking about it from a legal perspective, right? Because founders make, a lot of mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do think that from a legal perspective, one of the most common mistakes is underrating the importance of legal. That's something that we see, and it kind of like just follows a lot of founders throughout their journeys, or for the most part of their journeys, until they now realize. So yeah, that's one thing I see happen a lot.
Adeleke, I'm going to come over to you now.
Thank you very much. I think rather than go in depth into other things, I would first try to re-emphasize what she said. I think one of the biggest mistakes is that they think we are not useful until they find us extremely very useful that they can't do without us. So I think it's a common mistake, and I think it's a mistake that needs to stop, right? And apart from that, another mistake is that you find yourself being extremely open to looking for any money and every type of money, and in doing that, you expose yourself to certain terms in contracts that are unfavorable to you on the long run.
Thank you so much. Temidayo, do you want to add?
So I'm just going to piggyback off what Adeleke has said. What you find in most cases is the fact that founders, in giving out terms, they don't understand what it is they're doing. They're basically just saying, because this person is coming to give me some money, or because this person is bringing some ideas, then I have an obligation to give him certain number of shares, and then ultimately it causes problems in future. I think another thing that founders need to, another common mistake is proper documentation, to no record keeping, no understanding of documentation. And when we're saying putting themselves into onerous terms, there may or may not be a proper agreement, and it may be an AI generated agreement that they're dealing with. So, that's one key issue.
I like that you spoke about contracts, because I'm going to piggyback off that and move into our next question. So, what kind of contracts or what key terms in contracts should founders be making with their co-founders or with their first employees, or with anybody they're entering? When you're talking about at the very beginning, what contract should they be entering into? What are the key terms in those contracts?
Okay, so what I will say in terms of contracting, and when we're dealing with perhaps a founder and co-founder, is just understanding that. I would say what's important is having a founder's agreement. Let's deal with that first. And in there, you need to really understand the modalities for, allocating equity. So are we dealing, what are you bringing to the table? I think is the key thing. What's being brought to the table? What will be the indices that determine whether those shares would vest? Right, because there's a concept of giving equity. There's also the concept of getting additional equity once you've met certain KPIs. And I think that, equity distribution is one of the key issues that founders have. And I think that that's one point. I'm just going to leave Adeleke and Mo to address other points.
And you're completely right. And I'll touch on one or two things, but one of the things that I think is extremely very important is assigning roles, responsibilities between founders. I would say that in the last 1 year, one of the most paramount issues that I've had to deal with is actually resolving dispute between founders. And it's actually one of the things that I've seen break up a couple of startups in the last few months. And when I say that I'm trying to resolve, it got to a point that I thought I became a therapist, because you're trying to manage egos, you're trying to manage sentiments among people. And it all boils down to the fact that they fail to do the right thing at the right time, which is assigning that responsibility and what each party should take and what each party should have. Is it the type of equity that is going to vest over a period of time, and how the documentation for those things should happen. So it's just basically taking for granted the fact that things need to be formalized as it should be. And secondly is also intellectual property rights of the company, right? If you don't document appropriately, then you find a situation where a founder has created a product, and if you don't have it well documented, that product says it belongs to him, when in true sense, that product should actually belong to the company that the founder works.
Usually when you ask people and you say, oh, what is the one thing that will kill a company really fast, right? They will tell you lack of money. Maybe, but in practice, right, having done this for so long, what really kills a company really, really fast is when the founders are not aligned. Yeah. And the truth about it is that in life, right, you're going to do business with people that you're not aligned with all the time. But because you have documentation that says this is this person's role, this is the expectation, right, and this is what you get from doing this, then it's a lot easier to now bring everybody on the same page. And if not, you now begin to settle your dispute. Now, why I say that is because money problems can be solved, right? If a company is dying because it doesn't have money, the company can raise money, right? If the company is dying because, and then if you ask people again, what else can kill a company, and they tell you access to markets, okay, I probably agree. But the thing about access to markets also is that if you have market problems, you can pivot, right? You can change strategies, you can change markets. But most times, you can't really just handpick your co-founder and say, this is my co-founder, and you now take the person and now change it. So it's one of those problems that even if it doesn't seem like it can kill a company, it can. So I just really wanted to emphasize that, because in practice, we do that all the time. And just like Leke was saying, it's the same thing, right? You find yourself where you become a therapist and you're just, trying to, you spend a lot of time just managing that relationship. So what I would say is, in the beginning, even if you're starting a company with your spouse, your best friend, your grandmother, your neighbor, the person you met outside at Moonshot, document it, right? Whatever it is, your mentor, just make sure you have, it's better than nothing. And then the second point I was also going to raise in terms of contracts, which I think is also very important, is IP. But I was going to refer to IP from another perspective, which is that, yes, the company needs to own its IP, but one thing that people also forget, especially very early on when you're creating a company, other people are helping you. There are so many other people that are working on different parts of the business. And if you don't have IP transfer agreements, even if you've paid somebody to do something for you, you don't really have claim to it because that person has not assigned the IP and what they've created to you. So whatever it is, if you're working with someone that is building something for you, that is a consultant, that is a dev shop, whatever it is, just make sure that you have, an IP assignment, even if it's a clause, even if it's something in an email that says, hey, you acknowledge that everything you work on under this particular engagement belongs to the company. It can be simple like that. And then the third point I was also going to raise about documentation is that a lot of people fear documentation because they think it has to be extensive. Not really. Just like I mentioned, I'd said IP transfer agreements, but even if you don't have that, you can have this email, right, that says, what you're working on belongs to the company. So just take the bare bones of what you're trying to protect and then just ensure that you have something, even if it's a WhatsApp message, right? Something that documents that particular thought. Yeah.
So it looks like what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of problems that can come up in the beginning. So you have to attack it at the foundation. So I guess my next question would be, when is the right time to hire an in-house legal service, or do all startups need an in-house legal service? And what legal services should they be looking at? I'm going to go to Adeleke.
Oh, me. Because I'm not in-house and I'm outside, I would say that you should first get an external lawyer before you get an internal lawyer. But again, jokes apart, I think that, like everybody here has said, and we've all aligned on the same position, that legal services is as important to the business as oxygen or money is to the business, right? So you need a lawyer at one point in time, either external or internal. I think as you start off, because you're trying to be as lean as possible, you may not want to employ the services of an internal person. You may need to employ the service of an external person to start off with basic things, helping you here and there. But as you grow bigger and as you build in strength, you may need to employ somebody internal, because you then have a lot more internal documentation in terms of SLAs, employment contracts, and things like that. But please don't sack us when you employ the internal person. What you then need to do is that you still keep your external for more complex issues, and either on an ad hoc basis, on a retainer basis. But I think at every point in the life of a successful business, you must always have legal. And I must make an example of a couple of startups. I won't mention names. I've not been paid to market. But most of the household startups names that you know in market today, the ones that I've worked with, the most successful ones that I've worked with and I continue to work with, they started off very early. They started off from the point of registration. It means that you are forward thinking. You're looking at the business from a different perspective. You can't pinch on legal, so you must always find how to have that legal support somehow. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adeleke. I'm going to move on to the next question. And I want to talk about money now, or general interest in a startup. Now, we all watch Shark Tank, or we read the news. Okay, for me, I write the news, but we all read the news and we see that startups, when signing investments, when getting funding, they sometimes sign over some ridiculous interest to investors. So how do startups protect their interest while raising funds? What are the legal aspects they should be considering when raising funds?
Okay, legal aspects, I guess, is your documentation, right? I've had situations where, a startup is like, hey, the reason why I signed this deal, I'm just going to throw out numbers, right? So there's an investment deal of, I don't know, $30,000, right? I signed it, and then it had draconian terms, but at the time I signed it, I didn't have money to pay a lawyer. In fact, there was one lawyer I reached out to, and then they charged me 500,000 naira, but I couldn't pay them, so I just signed it. And then I'm like, because you just had this influx of capital, and then you're saying that you couldn't afford. And you ask them, they'll be like, oh, I had to pay my developers, I had to do this, I had to do that. But then we're now like 2 years in, and you're now sitting down with a problem that 500,000 naira would have solved for you 2 years ago, because somebody would have looked at it and then be like, oh, this is not right. Another thing also in terms of like draconian terms is that a lot of these investors, to be honest, they just push it to you. They expect a pushback, and if you don't, they're like, oh, all well and good, and everybody signs it. I do believe that companies and investors should be on the same side, but even from a legal perspective, right, there's a principle of equity and fairness that says that before you sign anything, the other person must have had opportunity, to run it, to review it and run it by counsel. So even if you can't afford a lawyer, tell your investor and say, hey, I want us to have a very fair deal. I like you, assuming you like them. If you don't like them, don't lie. I like you, and I want you on my cap table, right? But I can't afford legal services, but I need to be able to look at these deal terms and listen to what they say. In fact, their response would even tell you if it's the kind of person that you want to be with long term. Another thing you should also take into consideration is that all money is not good money, right? And not all good money is even great money. So you need to also ensure that, and this is not exactly like legal, but I think it's something that comes up later. You need to diligence your investor as much as they're diligencing you. They're not investing in you because they think that, they're just doing giveaway. That's not what it is. Because if they didn't think that there was an opportunity there, they won't, no matter how little that belief is, right? No matter how, how strong or not that conviction is. The reason why they are writing you a check, because they are business people at the end of the day. The reason why they are writing you a check is because they believe they can get outsized returns from the opportunity. So you need to diligence them as well. And some of that information is very, very accessible. Ask them, what are the other companies that you have invested in? Because it also tells you the kind of loopholes that you'll be looking out for, because you ask for onerous terms. Sometimes those things are even hidden in the agreement. You don't see it. But it comes out when you're talking to other people, right? Hey, I heard this, I heard that, I heard this. Then now your eyes are sharper, and then you're like, okay, let me just watch out for this to make sure it doesn't happen. So that's what I would say. Don't skim on legal. Like, if you think it's expensive now, it's going to be much more expensive in the future.
So let me just chip in. I think also there are two types of lawyers when it comes to technology. I think startup business especially. So there are lawyers who understand how to read contracts, but there are also lawyers who understand how to read contracts and they understand the market. So they have market intelligence pretty much. So Mo made a statement about not all money is good money. So some people come to you with extremely onerous terms, and if you are the type of lawyer that understands the market and you have the intelligence of the market, you've worked on several deals, you can almost tell immediately that I know 4 or 5 startups that these guys have invested that they've wrecked. You better don't take their money. And it has happened many times. So those are the kind of things that you need to look out for. So when you're trying to find a lawyer, and this is not me marketing, it's fine to do so if I were, right? You need to make sure that you're speaking to the lawyer that also understands what it is that you're looking for. Not just any lawyer that is willing to collect 500K or collect 250K. You get 250K service and you get 500K service and you still not be well in future.
I think to just add to your point, Adeleke, is the fact that there's getting a lawyer who has experience, and then there's actually listening to your lawyers. Because for a lot of startups as well, the primary focus is the money. And I mean, we as lawyers, we probably have heard this all the time. Lawyers mess up the deal. So let's have conversations. Let's have conversations on the side. But what Adeleke has said is really key. I mean, it is listening to your lawyers. And also what Mo had said earlier, which is KYC. The KYC on your investors is really important. That's knowing your investors. And I would say it's also important because you need to understand where funds are flowing from. Having someone in your company could impact future investments, because if it is found that someone has a reputational risk or the investor has there are some issues like Adeleke had identified, then it may impact future investments. So we need to be really mindful, and you need to understand, you need to make sure that these guys are not, it's not money laundering, right? And they're not passing funds through your company. So those things are really, really key.
So before we move on to the next question, if you're a founder here or you're an entrepreneur and you have questions for Adeleke, Mo, or Temidayo, please go to slido.com and enter your question. So that's slido.com, enter Moonshot by TechCabal, and enter the workstage for your questions. Temidayo, you mentioned something about compliance, and I mean, for a lot of people here, there's a lot of compliance changes. I mean, sometimes it even comes as a shock. So how important is compliance to long-term success in a business, and how can people keep up with the regulatory changes that come up from time to time?
Compliance is very important. I mean, we can't belabor that fact, especially if your business is in a regulatory-heavy sector. So I would say for fintechs and, well, for a lot of technology companies, there are a lot of laws. The laws are changing every day, right? So compliance is key. Now, I would say that something that we do, and I'm not selling my firm, but something we do at the point when you're trying to raise capital is that we tend to do some level of due diligence on the company itself, so on the startup itself, to see its level of compliance. Now, the reason for that is if you're if your company is in order, if you are actually complying with regulations, you are up to date on all of the filings you have to make for that business sector, the chances of getting good investment is pretty high, because they know that this is a company who's actually maintaining its books, who's actually, complying with the laws, and there isn't so much to be done, right, in terms of putting the company back together. So that's one thing in terms of compliance. I think that a way in which to keep updated, honestly, you should have good lawyers, to be honest. Have good lawyers. I mean, there's a lot of articles out there that all of our firms tend to send out. We send out regulatory updates. You need to read up. You can't say because I am a founder in, well, I don't want to go. Perhaps in the fintech, you need to know what exactly it is that CBN is coming up with. You need to understand, what SEC is saying in terms of cryptocurrencies. You need to ensure that whatever it is that you are doing, it actually falls within the ambit of the law. So keeping up to date, I mean, there's Google, you can get Google notifications on those regulations. You can read articles from law firms. A lot of us use social media platforms now. We have our LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and follow the regulators. It's also important to follow the regulators, because sometimes you will get first-hand information from the regulators themselves. But I will re-emphasize the point that you need to keep your lawyers at your right hand. Actually, your lawyer's number should be number 1. Speed dial, yeah. So that's it.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think when it comes to compliance, your strategy cannot be after the fact. I think it has to be more leaning towards more preventative than curative. So that means that you have to be one step ahead. You have to always, understand what's even the temperature of, now depending on the industry you are, even the temperature of your regulators, right? Because if you're paying attention, you just be like, these guys have been moving, there might be something there, and you ask. Another thing also is, and I don't think that we do this enough, which is kind of like dialoguing with your regulators. I do think that that's important. Sitting down on the table, I mean, it doesn't mean that you're sitting down on the table that you're now on the side of the government or anything like that, but you are running a business in a country that is regulated. Mm-hmm. And if you are running a business in a regulated sector, you literally cannot just, not have that dialogue. And the dialogue doesn't have to be you personally. It could be through a coalition or whatever, a group or things like that. And that brings me to my third, before I go to the third point, just staying on that second point, the reason for that is that sometimes even the regulators themselves, I mean, this happens everywhere in the world, it's not just Nigeria. The regulators don't even understand what they are regulating. They just see something they're like, we don't like it, ban, and then that's it, strike, they've banned it. So that dialogue is important for you to be able to make sure that, they actually understand the thing that you're doing, right? If you're a digital asset provider, for instance, having to explain that this is different from cryptocurrencies, so that at the time when cryptocurrencies are being banned, you are not just looped into that. Do you get what I mean? Like, it's very, very important. That dialogue is very, very important. Then the third thing I would say, just coming from dialogue, is that don't work in silos. I know that you can see people in your industry and just be like, oh, that person's my competitor, we're not talking. Mm-hmm. No, that's not how it works. What happens is, because some of the regulatory things that happen, especially in an environment like Nigeria, you would hear it when you're sitting down having drinks with someone, you know what I mean? Like, before it's a secular that people see on Monday and everybody is now, some people have already known by Friday nights, do you get? So they're already prepared. So again, I'm just saying that it doesn't have to be drinks. It could be a WhatsApp group. You know what I mean? Just making sure that you are in a community where you can get feedback and also information from people who work in the same industry as you. So yes, everybody is competing for something, but at the same time, there has to be some level of, information sharing, even to the extent that is possible, even in that. And yeah, when it comes to compliance, you want to have your ears on the ground.
So advice from Mo, go out for drinks. This is not the time to be an introvert.
That's not what I said. I said that you can do WhatsApp groups.
Let's take some questions from the people. Can we go to Slido and see what questions we have? Mo, there's a question for you. Yes. Do patent laws for tech intellectual property exist? If yes, how do they work or how are they
But
obtained?
I didn't introduce myself as a patent lawyer. Who asked that question? Who's the person? You need to stand up, go outside. I'm joking. Okay. Do patent laws for tech intellectual property exist? If yes, how do they work or how are they obtained? Okay, sure, I can talk about this. So when you say patent laws, I guess I'm guessing that you're talking about laws that regulate registration of patents, right? Yep. Okay. So yeah, they exist in different parts of the world. Funny enough, in Nigeria, you can actually register a patent. So I was looking at the report a couple of days ago, and then I realized that our firm did, because we did, I think, I won't say the number of patents that were registered last year, but let me just say that we registered 90% of the patents that were registered in Nigeria last year. So that's telling you that, wait, it's not a lot. It's telling you that people are not actually, they're not registering patents. That's it. So, and a lot of the patents that are registered in Nigeria are being registered by non-Nigerians. So that tells you if you have an idea to make this light brighter, put together your patent application. But I do think that is something that we need to really focus on when it comes to, because if we want to industrialize Nigeria, as we say, we need to be able to, have an environment that encourages innovation. And one of those things is that people should actually be experimenting, and they should actually, registering patents. So if your question is if there are patent laws in Nigeria, yes, it is. And then that is also housed by the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Nigeria, the same people where you have your trademarks as well. So yes, I mean, we've been through that process, and I think we did it for the first time maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, because I just thought it was going to be like a very cumbersome process. But I was very surprised. The entrepreneur that we worked with, he was very knowledgeable about his invention, so he had put a very good product statements together and all of that. We just walked him through the process. It was funny enough, it was a very exciting thing. So if you have anything that you think is patentable, yes, you can. And then you can do a lot of the process yourself, although I'll still say get a lawyer to help you, but in Nigeria, yes, you can. In the US, which we also do as well, that's slightly complicated. In the US, for you to be able to register a patent in the US, you need to go through a patent lawyer, which is very different from, a commercial regular lawyer, because you have something that is called the patent bar. So in order for you to be a patent lawyer, you need to have passed the patent bar. So, and it can get pretty expensive. But if you have the dream to do a worldwide patent, I would say start from Nigeria. The doors are open, and it took us just a few months to get our first patents out. So yeah, I'll encourage you to do it.
Thank you very much, Mo. Adeleke and Temidayo, I'm throwing you guys the next question. For founders that can't afford a lawyer right away, what steps can they take to make your job easier once they can?
Okay, so I think that when I spoke earlier, I said something about keeping records and documentation. I mean, if you have proper records of the decisions you've made, of should I say some agreements you've made, then it would be good. It would make things easier for us. I also think, for founders that can't afford a lawyer, one thing I would advise, just before Mo spoke earlier about, being in communities. So there's so many hubs, there's so many tech hubs, and you tend to find mentors in there. And there are some legal mentors there, so they probably would guide you in terms of documentation and what you need to put in place, such that by the time you're engaging an external lawyer, it then just makes life so much easier.
I mean, you're 100% right. I just pray that you'll be able to afford a lawyer, because you can't delay my gratification. In Jesus' name, you'll be able to
Amen.
afford a lawyer. I can't wait for you to be able to afford it. But again, she's completely right. we've experienced many clients that years after, we've had to do a lot of housekeeping. We've had to now start putting documentation together. But you see, even the investors can see this. And it tells a lot about the type of company they're trying to invest in. It tells a lot about the type of founder that there is. And so in truth, as much as possible, if by any chance at all, which I pray against, you can't afford a lawyer, please also ensure that you document and you keep everything appropriately so that when that day comes, you'll be able to pass on all that information to your lawyer and they'll be able to correct some of the things that may need to be corrected, just hoping that it won't be too late for such corrections.
Thank you. Mo, so someone wants pro bono work.
Sorry, I just want to quickly add something concerning that. Another thing also is you should please educate yourself. So, see, when we're talking to clients, we even like clients that come to us from an educated perspective and saying, oh, I understand these are the issues, but what's your advice? There's tons of resources out there, startup schools. In fact, at Vazi, we even have like a startup library as well. You go through that startup library, you at least have an idea of what you're looking at. So I do think that even if you can't afford a lawyer, understand what exactly is going on, understand why a safe is a safe, right? Understand why you shouldn't do multiple valuations in one particular round. You get what I mean? Like just make sure you educate yourself, and there are tons of resources online. Yeah.
So we're going to our pro bono question. What is required in a founder's agreement and what is the proper way of doing it?
So again, I would still say that you should get a lawyer to do a founder's agreement for you, but I also know that a lot of people are operating very leanly. This whole question, I don't really like that question about what if you cannot afford a lawyer, how do you build a company? Because I would ask, anybody that asked me that question, you didn't ask me. But if let me answer it, I'll ask you, I'll say, okay, I can't afford an engineer, how do I build a tech company? That's what I'll ask you, because really and truly, it means that, because a lot of people, see, I was having a meeting with someone a couple of days ago. This was a second-time founder. And he told me, and he said that the moment I got my first check, the person I called was you. Do you know why? Because he has seen Shege the first time around when he did not get a lawyer and he was saying he could not afford a lawyer. The moment he just called us straight up. So again, you will see this a lot with a lot of second-time founders. I'm sure it probably happens, right? They don't scheme on legal. A second-time founder would never tell you, I cannot afford legal. And that should tell you the importance. So I do think that that's very critical. But yeah, in terms of, now moving to your question on the co-founders agreement, yes, there are tons of resources online, right? You can download templates of founders agreements. Now, I'm not telling you should use templates for your legal documents. So I'm just saying that in the beginning where you cannot afford one, you can get paid templates. Usually they're better, at least to an extent. Some of the templates are reviewed by lawyers somewhere, but just make sure you do that. And the question of educating yourself now becomes more critical, because when you're looking at the founder's agreement, then you can tell that, okay, this one should not be here, or this does not look like the template I'm looking for. So that's what I'll say. But two things that you should always cover in your co-founder's agreement, and if there's anything else that I said that you forget, don't forget this one. Who owns what and when they own what. So who owns what is just saying that this person owns XYZ, number of shares in the company, and then they get it at XYZ time. And I think she mentioned vesting. Just because somebody owns 25% of the company doesn't mean that they get it first, the 25% immediately. They can get 25% either tied to timelines, which is what, the vesting schedule you would see typically, but it can also be tied to specific events. If the person is an engineer, when this is built, you get XYZ% of, of the ownership. Mm-hmm. And then tied to ownership again is like, I see some co-founder agreements, and somebody's like, oh, this is my co-founder. You will now see 95%, 5%. That's not your co-founder. That's not. And people ask me all this question all the time. They're like, how should I split the equity? And I always say that, except there's a very, very critical reason that it has to be so, like it has to be so far apart. You have to understand that at the point where the company has just started, it is literally just an idea. Yeah. Right? It's execution. Mm-hmm. So if you have 95%, and this guy that you met at Moonshot is like, I'm happy to take 5%, right? That's what he said today. But one day he's going to wake up and say, why am I why am I even sweating like this now? I only own 5% of this company. This person has 95%. So if you really want that dedication from your co-founder, whatever it is, I'm not saying it necessarily has to be 50-50, but that split should be as equitable as possible.
So let me just chime in a little. So and Mo is 100% correct, but that is almost specific to those that started together. Yeah, so we've also, yes. So there might be situations where there's been a founder who has built a business that is very successful or almost there, and he wants a CTO to work with him. He calls the CTO his co-founder. I mean, technically co-founder, right? But then you then take out of your own equity and then you give to the CTO. Yeah, so those instances also do occur, but not when you're starting together and it's as if you're dragging your co-founder along with you.
Thank you so much. That's all the time we have for questions today and for the panel in general. Thank you, Mo. Thank you, Temidayo. Thank you, Adeleke. Please let's have a round of applause for our panelists.